example, but the fact is that Muhammad himself was a warrior. He beheaded prisoners. He himself was a very violent man. We can't... I would say, and many people who are Muslims, and many of my Muslim friends and colleagues and so on, realize that, you know, Islam gives you, like all religions, a guide to life. But we cannot ignore the violence of Islam's tenets, of the faith itself.
Douglas Murray seems correct here, doesn't he? Anyone who has read the Quran knows that Muhammad himself was a warlord who participated in taking the lives of others. And since Prophet Muhammad is the ultimate role model for Muslims, are we surprised that many Muslim extremists are following his tenets by committing acts of terrorism? Is that supposed to be shocking? No. The popular argument by other Muslims when one points out the murderous nature of Islam is that a majority of Muslims aren't terrorists. And that is correct. Most Muslims don't kill and maim others like Muhammad did. In fact, the country with the largest population of Muslims in the world, Indonesia, doesn't have a terrorist problem. But that isn't a good argument, since the true adherents of any religion are usually a small percentage. Here is how Douglas Murray puts it.
What I'm saying is that we can recognize the good things within Islam, the peaceable things in Islam. We cannot pretend that the verses that are violent and the violent doings of Muhammad did not occur because they...
Christianity also urges Christians to act Christ-like. That is the literal definition of the religion. But how many Christians actually sell all they have and follow God? Very few. So the fact that most Muslims aren't murderous says nothing about the murderous quality of Islam. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. Here is how Douglas Murray puts it.
That the Quran is meant to be the final revelation of God to man. The final revelation. There is none after it. And all the revelations that come before in the Abrahamic religions are part of Islam. If you are the recipients of the final word, and you are the followers of that word, and the followers of that prophet and that God, why is your society not working? And why are other societies working? I think this is a deep psychological problem within much of the Muslim world, which is we thought we were the winners theologically. We're the ones who got the final revelation. And I think, by the way, that much of the anti-Americanism, the anti-Zionism, and anti-Westernism in much of the Muslim world falls down to this fact somewhere at its root.
So we have a religion that has murderous ideals, which, frankly, don't work. Yet much of our civilization humors those ideals for some reason. In the UK, if you outline why Islam is a civilizational cancer with facts, you might get arrested. That is exactly what happened to ex-soldier Daffron Williams of Britain. The incredible thing is that Mr. Williams never actually said anything about Islam or about Prophet Muhammad. He simply reacted to the stabbing of 3 young girls at a Taylor Swift concert. After the stabbing, Mr. Williams posted that, "Civil war is here. The only thing missing is bullets." That is the next step. Isn't he correct? Do Islamists not hate the West? Here is how Douglas Murray makes that argument.
Which is, how come they're doing better than us when we were told that we were best? And I think it causes serious cognitive dissonance. It's one of the reasons why the Muslim world is so vulnerable to conspiracy theory. It's why when a shark attack happened at Sharm el-Sheikh 10 years ago, the local authorities said that the shark that had eaten the bather at the most popular tourist resort in Egypt had been sent by the Zionists. This is like seeing the hand of the West. So it goes back to our earlier conversation. Seeing the hand of the West in other things is an explanation for why the things are not doing well there. And in country after country, whether it's Egypt, which is doing comparatively well compared to some of them, or Iran, as well, the immiseration of the people, the inability to unleash talent, and much more comes back to this small number of people benefiting and having no idea how to unleash talent underneath. That and political and personal and religious freedom, including freedom of speech and freedom of worship, are the absolute prerequisites. And that is why I cannot understand the suicidal anti-Westernism within our societies in our time.
Anyway, that comment from Mr. Williams was enough to earn him a visit from the police. But they didn't stop there. In court, Mr. Williams was accused of stirring up racial violence, And the evidence was in posts where he said that Islamists want to turn Britain into an Islamic state, and everyone should stand up against that. For his troubles, Mr. Williams was convicted of stirring up racial hatred and was sentenced to 2 years in prison, with 1 year served on license and another served in prison. The justice system seems to argue, right as the blood of young people are being spilled, that there is really no difference between Islam and all other religions. So saying bad things about Islam must be categorically false and mischievous. Here is what Douglas Murray thinks of that claim.
One of the interesting things about the difference between Christianity and Islam, by the way, we have an idiot political class in all of our countries that pretends sometimes for the sake just simply of interfaith dialogue, sometimes simply for the sake of fudging along, and sometimes just because they don't know what they're talking about. They pretend that all religions are basically the same. And, you might practice Christianity, I might practice Islam, and he might practice yoga. And it all comes out the same. It's not true. And if you want to know why it's not true, I give one example. I mean, the history of Christianity has been very bloody, not least in the country we're sitting in and in the continent. We had wars of religion for hundreds of years where people in Europe killed each other for different interpretations of what the Eucharist was. There was a madness in it. My late friend Jonathan Sacks said when he welcomed Ratzinger, Cardinal Ratzinger, the Pope Benedict, to the UK, Sacks said, peoples of Europe lost faith in God. When they lost faith, the peoples of faith could live together. And there's a great amount of truth in that. So the history of Christianity has been very bloody. I think all religions are. All history is bloody, by the way. But would the history of Christianity have been more bloody or less bloody if Jesus had been more like Muhammad?
And that is the great distinction that no one wants to hear. Christianity has had a bloody history, but Christians can, in good faith, argue that all the bloodletting in the past was against the values of Christ. Can Muslims argue the same? Even today, moderate Muslims are often unable to speak against the terrorist acts of their brothers in religion. They maintain a strange silence that either signals acceptance of the terroristic acts or fear in the face of rebuke from other Muslims who support it. It gets much worse.
Couple of examples. The most obvious one is what is one of the greatest moments in Christian scripture, but the moment when Jesus has brought to him the woman who was caught in adultery. And what does Jesus say when the crowd wanted to stone her for her sins? He says, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." And the crowd go away. Now, in the Islamic tradition, a very, very similar thing happens when a woman is brought to Muhammad and he has her stoned. So, history of Christianity, more bloody or less bloody if Jesus was more like Muhammad? I think everyone would say likely to be more bloody. Jesus himself, in the Christian traditions, in all the texts, I think, would you agree, only once really loses his temper? And that is when the money changers are in the temple and he overturns their tables. Because the house of God must not be polluted in this way. Now, you may say, that just goes to show that we too can lose our tempers occasionally. Well, maybe it does. Muhammad beheaded hundreds and hundreds of Jews with his own hand. History of Christianity, more bloody or less bloody if Jesus had been more like Muhammad?
The answer seems painfully obvious. But it is an answer that will probably get you arrested and imprisoned if you express it online in free countries like Britain. It's a bit odd, isn't it? The United Kingdom prides itself as a modern democracy, and will often lecture third world nations about the dangers of gagging speech and limiting free speech. Yet, the country would send an army of officers to your home if you just mistakenly told everyone that Muslims don't seem like particularly peaceful people following a peaceful religion. That doesn't seem right, does it? It doesn't matter if you've risked your life and fought for the country like Mr. Williams. It doesn't matter if you got PTSD from fighting for your country like Mr. Williams. It certainly does not matter if you are respected in your community. If you make one comment that our moral overlords do not like, you will be prosecuted and thrown in prison. And of course, the press has also been captured by these moral overlords.
A German publisher said to me recently, the public now here read our papers in the same way that people used to in Eastern Europe. They read between the lines. They read that yesterday a person did something to another person in a place. And they know they're not being given the information, so they fill it in themselves. Because they didn't name the person who did the act, it must have been a migrant, etc., etc., which actually means that the public mind thinks even worse than the facts that are happening. And, I mean, and people think there's no potential.
Of course, there are potential downsides to this. It just seems like our leaders, especially in Europe, are optimizing for those downsides and nothing else. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash the like and subscribe buttons.